is Dan Miller. I'm with Progressive Farmer Magazine and DTN. I'm here today with Brad Harris. We spent the morning going through the Firestone Ag Tire Test Facility. And Brad, why don't you tell me what you do and what we saw today a little bit?
Well, thank you for having us on, Dan. Brad Harris, I'm the manager of the Field Engineering Group for Firestone Ag Tires. What we do is we test and place tires for evaluation for all the new stuff coming around, and we work with customers to help them get the most productivity out of their tires. So we've invited you out here at the Firestone Ag Test Center in beautiful Columbiana, Ohio. It's a 300-acre farm where we do all kinds of different durability tests, performance traction tests, and have an education center.
And you were telling me earlier today that you can look at a tire and go, yep, it's big, it's round, and it's black. But there's a lot more to it, right? What are the demands on today's agricultural tires?
The biggest demand on tires is traction and being able to carry all these heavy loads, Dan. We're seeing on high clearance sprayers, those things are going anywhere between 50 and 60,000 pounds. But we have a tire that's 17 inches wide trying to carry it and going up and down the road at 40 miles an hour. So when we talk about tires, they're round, they're black. It's the internal construction that is designed to carry the load with the proper inflation pressures to give them the proper steps to know what tire they have by reading what the sidewall is, and then putting the proper inflation pressure into that tire so that they get the most life out of that and use it correctly.
Okay, and you told me today that road speeds at some points are moving up towards 40 miles an hour, right, down roads. And what does that mean for a tire?
Anytime that you start increasing the speed, we start developing a lot of heat in that tire. And there's a lot of dynamic changes that happen between just going from 25 to 30 and then up to 40 mile an hour up and down the road. So in the field, stubble is the biggest thing that we're seeing as an issue for customers. With these healthier crops, our great fertilizer programs, we're all trying to get the best yields. We have a healthy stalk, and when we have a stalk that's 100 points and the rubbers that we use on tires are only between that 68 and 72 points, the harder substance wins, and that's why we need to work with customers to make sure that we're not driving directly down that corn row. Yeah. And then managing the axle loads that we're going in there. We've got larger front fold planters that will transfer 10,000 pounds to the rear of the tractor when we go from the field to the road. The biggest question is, what pressure do we need? And that's the thing, setting the inflation pressure in our tires. What's important to note is, yes, the tire is a structure, it's what transmits the torque to the ground, but it's the air pressure inside of the tire that's carrying the load that we're going to the field. The structure around it's just containing it correct. The thing is, what pressure should we be running in our tires? We need to know just two things, the tire size and the axle load. And once we know that those two things exist, we have those numbers, we can use tools like the inflation tables or the new Firestone Ag inflation calculator found on firestoneag.com. Type in that information and it tells us what our minimum inflation pressure should be to carry the loads that are there. And in some operations, we may have 2 to 3 different inflation pressures that we need to use based on if we're carrying a 3-point tillage tool or we're just doing drawbar pull, and if we're keeping the duals on the tractor all year or pulling the duals off the tractor. Okay. And it starts with using one of these. Which is an inflation pressure gauge. So I encourage customers to go get just like a $10 to $15 digital one. It doesn't have to be the fancy $200-$300 one. The $15 to $20 one works. Know what your inflation pressure is and then check it.
Okay, let's start there.
It starts with knowing where a valve core is, opening the cap, and then just measuring the inflation pressure by putting it on there, checking it, and recording it. One thing that we do on our farm in Ohio is we put the inflation pressure right here next to the valve core.
Of what it should be?
What it should be. So 9 PSI, 15 PSI. We'll write it in permanent marker. That way we don't have to keep going back and forth into the cab to check it.
You said earlier, if there's going to be a problem with a tire, a lot of times it's here, right?
Right.
A lot of times you're going to find it here. So what is it that goes wrong here?
So what happens is there's a rubber seal here that's being held down by this little nut. And if this nut's loose, air can wick through there. Just take soapy water and spray it around there if you've got a tire that's leaking, and we can see that maybe it's around this nut. And then make sure we use our valve cap here after we've checked the inflation pressure. This way it prevents any mud or dirt getting in there as we're working the field.
What's next?
Next, after we know our pressure, we've set it, we look at the sidewalls. Let's look for cuts and tears. If we get injured, we heal, and tire doesn't heal itself. So if we got little nicks, that's okay. But if we're seeing cords, if we're seeing the steel or the fabric in there, it's time to look at a new tire. Okay. So there's two things to look for in the tread. First is how much tread depth do we have? And if we've worn down to about 80%,
which is where, about here roughly?
About here where this little line is.
Okay.
That's when we start losing traction in the field, noticeably. Dry years, it's not a problem, but when we get into that wetter or muddier condition, that's when we're going to notice a lot of slip. We're going to lose efficiencies, and it's time to put these on a preventative maintenance to replace them.
Okay.
After that, let's look in the tread itself, in the void area we call it. Look for any stubble damage. Again, if it just looks ugly and we don't see any of the belts or the cords, we can continue to run it. But
you've done a calculation where if a tire takes you down, right, what it costs per hour.
So if we're in that optimal planting window and we go down and we're waiting for someone to show up using just a 16-row corn planter, for every hour we're down, we could have up to $570 per hour of waiting of yield loss by missing that optimal planting window. After we check that, the tread, the sidewalls, the last thing is the hardware. Make sure that our lug nuts and our bolts are secured torque. Usually it takes anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes to do this check around a tractor, depending on how particular you have to set the torque wrench and how many of those bolts are loose. So
anything else?
So no, that's those are the things to really look for a tire performance thing. If customers do have questions, do need to look at maybe purchasing some new tires, encourage them to go see their local Firestone dealer.
Brad, thank you so much for your time, and thanks Firestone for your time bringing you here for this for the Commodity Classic. So.